I'll call the meeting to order. It is 7:45 on Monday, is it the 15th? Uh,
18.
Whatever day, the 18th, okay. It's 7:45, Monday, the 18th. This is a public hearing to discuss a proposed change to our zoning ordinances. We have with us this evening, the public, of course, are invited via Zoom and via virtual. I am sitting in City Hall as well. As you can see, the door is open. So we also would have the ability to have walk-ins and people to speak on this issue should they decide to do that. We do have the place set up for social distancing. I would ask, since we are, most everybody's probably using Zoom. I don't expect anyone to walk in. We will recognize anybody that wants to speak. If you will get to that point, we'll have people speak in favor, speak against. And if you want to speak, if you would raise your hand, and then we'll recognize you. I see everyone's name here. I've got a Karen Wessel, I got Lindell Burns, I've got Kim Burns, and I've got David Wolf. We have also with us Chip from Waycross Media. We have with us Chris Anderson from our Community Development Department, and Councilmember Herman. So we've got a nice little group here, and so we will begin the meeting and call it to order. Chris, would you like to discuss the proposed changes to the ordinances?
Yes, thank you. Just as by way of background, we had several incidents that required unusual police response that involved residents or short-term residents or guests of Airbnb rentals, and had neighbors from those properties asking the city to take a look at regulating Airbnb and trying to minimize or eliminate the issues that we'd already experienced. In looking at the issue, we looked at several ordinances that are already existing, including the ordinance that the City of Cincinnati uses. And also the statistics with Airbnb of the number of rentals in Forest Park, which were at the time only 3 and only represented 2 property owners. One property owner had 2 rentals. So that's 3 out of about 700 housing units in the city. And looking at that, we concluded that this was something that really is very much a very small in terms of properties, but large in terms of impact. So it was our conclusion on the staff and our recommendation to the council that we basically prohibit rentals, short-term rentals of 30 days or less. And the 30-day number is significant because it's sort of the drawing line between, in the state of Ohio, where someone falls under the innkeeper laws that govern hotels, motels, and other lodging, versus landlord-tenant laws that govern your typical apartment or home that is rented. And the difference there is when someone stays at a hotel, they're a transient occupant, and that means that they are resident for a short period of time of less than 30 days, but they have not changed their permanent address. They have a permanent address that they're going to return to. Whereas if you were to rent an apartment or a house, you change your permanent address by doing so. That becomes your new address. And the tenant has additional protections you have to go through an eviction process to remove someone from the property. Whereas in transient occupancy, you don't have that same due process. So that's some of the background. I'm going to put this ordinance up on the screen if I can here. And, is it up? No.
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay, good. All right. So the recitations at the beginning of the ordinance basically summarize what I've just gone over. One additional item is that we already regulate hotels, motels, and tourist courts, a sort of older term, as a group in our commercial zoning districts. That is, there are permitted uses in our highway service district, which is near I-275, and the location of all of the hotels that are in Forest Park. And we have it classified as a special exception, which requires planning commission approval in the planned business district, which covers most of our shopping centers and retail districts. That use is prohibited in the rest of the districts. It's prohibited in our manufacturing and industrial park districts, and it's prohibited in all of our residential districts. So you can't have a hotel in a Forest Park neighborhood, essentially. And what we have with Airbnb and other short-term rentals is something that is approaching that in terms of the way that the property is used. So we go through that in this draft ordinance, and then the actual body of the ordinance is pretty simple and fairly short. We add a definition to our list of definitions in the zoning code for short-term rental. And that, as you can see, is that it's held out to the public for rent. It's not just a house guest or a relative staying with you or a student or exchange student, I should say. But rather a member of the public, a self-selecting person who comes to an agreement with the owner to rent the property. So, and it is for 30 days or less. And then in section 2, what we have in our R1 district, which is our first single-family residential district, we have sections that have permitted uses, accessory uses, special exceptions, and then subsection D is prohibited uses. So right now we only have one listed prohibited use in R1, and that is kennels. Not really germane to this, other than this is going to be added below that, and that is short-term rental of a dwelling unit or part thereof. And that simply clearly lists it as prohibited rather than any of those other categories. And then by reference, that same language is included in our R2 district and our R3. And so that's really the long and short of it. And it is a proposal from the staff. We have gone over it with the city council in a work session. The coronavirus epidemic sort of scrambled our schedule a little bit, so we're about 3 weeks behind schedule. But we're in the process of the review of the draft. I'm getting feedback. Is anybody else?
Yeah, I'm getting that.
Okay. All right. So this public hearing is one of the other 3 steps of the review. We have the council work session, the public hearing, and then we also have a planning commission review. Because the planning commission hasn't met due to the safety considerations, they have not yet reviewed this, but they will review it before it is presented to council for for reading and adoption. So that would conclude my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Hey, Chris, I don't know how you can you take that off the screen? Because I
Yeah.
can only see you and that. Okay, great. Let me get this here. We'll essentially what we've got, we'll ask for pros and cons in just a second, but just to expand a little bit on what Chris has to say. It is administration from our standpoint, from a staff standpoint, that we are in favor of the passage of this ordinance. We believe that essentially all we are doing is clarifying what was already prohibited, and this takes all the guesswork out of it. So we hope that this helps to clarify some of the information. The schedule would be to have the public hearing tonight and bring it back to future council meeting. So at this time, I'd like to ask if there anyone is anyone in favor that would like to speak in favor of the ordinance.
Good evening. This is Kim Burns. I am the treasurer of the Mill Road Station Phase 2 HOA, currently dealing directly with a current residence that is using the Airbnb facility. I'm very much in favor of this. We know that in some instances, this contradicts what we have even in our covenant, but yet within the covenant, we really don't have any teeth to do anything really about it. And it's good to know that we are clarifying what the city expects from the residents and the residential areas within Forest Park. It will be helpful as we move forward to have some additional guidance should we find that the residence is still being occupied either within the short term of the 30 days or if it's being considered beyond. And that might be a step 2 or 3 just to get some additional guidance from us for us as to how we might approach this. But I'm definitely in favor of the amendment for the ordinance.
Okay, great. Anybody else would like to speak in favor of the ordinance? Mr. Burns or Wendell? You're still muted. Okay. Hold on. Wendell, hold on just a second, Wendell. We can't hear you. Your microphone may not be working properly. I can't hear him. Can anybody else hear him?
No, he has been unmuted.
Yeah, you're unmuted, but you're not, we're not picking you up, Wendell.
We've learned in a lot of our Zoom meetings, people forget to turn up the volume.
Ah, okay, it's going to a different situation. That's good. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, come on through.
Yeah, I am in favor of this approach. Because as you said, it is a clarification of the existing ordinances and making sure and ensuring that it's clear what the city is expecting in an R1 district. But it's also looking at this from the standpoint of both sides of the situation. The homeowner who chooses to take advantage of their home in this space, as well as their neighbors. Because as you know, it's a community situation. And in this situation, if you don't clarify, the neighbor is not considered and the impacted party is not considered. The situation we recently had or have had with the home that we have in our community is that it disrupted on 2 occasions at minimum the tranquility and the safety of our neighborhood, to the detriment of the immediately adjacent neighbors, as well as those who were at least a block and a half or more because of the nature of the events that they had in that home. So using this approach, one, it's a prohibited use, but also based on the fact that the city, zoning, and council have the ability, should a person choose to seek a special exception, they have an avenue to do that because that does not change in the zoning. It also gives the city the ability to govern the situation through the special exception. So I think in this, taking this approach, everyone wins. And Chris, I guess the other question I had is that the ordinance that you put up, has that been posted on the website, and what's that ordinance number?
Well, actually, no, it had not been posted on the website, and I will post it. It doesn't have a number yet, but it will be assigned a number once it's put on a council agenda.
Okay, thank you.
And anyone else in favor, would like to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? One more time, and anybody would speak in favor? Seeing none, anybody want to speak against the proposed ordinance?
I guess I'm gonna raise is anybody else?
No, you're the last
it.
one. There's another individual, but
Okay,
please go right ahead. State your name and your address, and please.
I'm Karen Wessel. I'm at 1295 Waycross.
Okay, thank you.
I'm trying to turn off my other noises over here. I apologize if they interrupt things. One question, because I just heard, I was trying to listen, but the Wendell said something about a special exception. What was that in reference to? Is there something in the ordinance that people can do transient rental, or what is the special exception that he might have mentioned? I wasn't following where he was. Anybody?
Basically, and I'll just take it real quick, but this is really for Chris, but essentially, the ordinance does not allow for any kind of transient rental,
Okay.
as described. The exception would be everyone has the ability to petition city council,
Uh-huh.
planning, I guess it's the planning commission, Chris, and ask for a change that would be an exception to the prescribed zoning. So that doesn't stop people from saying and coming to council and saying, hey, we'd like to have an exception. But the exception would be to grant it, not to take it away. This would
Okay.
be so that everyone still has that ability. If someone could make a good case for it, city council could grant that. But right
And I
now,
understand.
this would exclude it.
I understand the difficulty with this in residential areas, and I kind of figured it was because there was some trouble with some people.
Well, we would say that
Prompted it.
it's not a direct ordinance against any particular individual or any particular address
But
or
the
anything.
potential of it happening anywhere within the
Yes.
Forest Park area, and I understand that. Um,
Yes,
I wondered about it when I saw it, and I figured it was probably about the Airbnb, although I think Airbnb is actually a company, and it's kind of like Coca-Cola as a Coke. We've
Yeah.
all kind of laughed about that one. Um,
Good name.
I happen to know a couple of people that worked with the city of Cincinnati to create and develop the ordinance that they came up with, and they worked like for over a year. And you did mention, Chris, I think that you did look at that ordinance.
Yes.
And I also, when this all came up in my world about a year ago, we were looking at ordinances in other cities across the country, and then was looking at the Cincinnati city ordinance and realized how good it is, how fair it is. What would there be any consideration, because in the Cincinnati ordinance, I understand that there's all kinds of regulations, there's registration, there's certain guidelines that people that want to do an Airbnb have to, or how should I be referring to it? Short-term rental. There we go. Airbnb, or there's guidelines, there's regulations. Again, there's registration that you're doing it. I think there's even something in there about being a taxable item for the city to be able to collect on. Um, it struck me that I know Cincinnati is bigger and a lot more problematic, I guess, but um, I kind of look at it from everybody's talking about this new world that we're living in. There's a lot of conversation to help people not only, have a little bit of extra income because income, the recession, everybody's screaming about, you know, by allowing my home to rent to someone for a night or two or a week would allow me to you have some kind of minimal income. It's not like it's thousands of dollars. Also, when I again that comparison with the city of Cincinnati, I'd like to hear, Chris, if has it been considered that you could put together something that looks like their proposal and ordinance that they came up with? Again, because it has all these parameters in it that would protect if a person violates any of these regulations, um, they can't do it. They're told, you can't get license regulation, whatever they're calling it. I'm not real familiar with it, so help me out, I guess.
Sure. I think your summary of the Cincinnati ordinance is a good one. They basically created a permit and license system for owners of homes who want to list their properties, in particular with Airbnb. And they also have a separate agreement with that company to add on the tax that Cincinnati imposed on the rental payments. And that's a 3% tax. So that is collected along with the, what's the right word here? With the amount paid, the tax is added on right there on the Airbnb website.
Okay.
So there are probably two big things that at least on our recommendation, led us away from that. One is a matter of scale or capacity, if you will. City of Cincinnati has more dollars and staff capacity than we do to administer a program like this. And I should note that that excise tax is not dedicated to the administration of their program. It's instead being used to supplement affordable housing, because it's been found that if cities that have a lot of Airbnb or other short-term rental arrangements tends to reduce the amount of housing that's affordable to middle and lower income families. So that's a mitigating factor for them. But the other big difference is simply the number of Airbnb rentals and demand for them by occupants.
By what?
And the demand.
Okay.
So if you look at our city of Cincinnati and the metro area as a whole, people travel here for business. They travel here to visit family and other things like that. They also travel to visit our cultural attractions or other tourist destinations. And we are not so far removed from those destinations that people would not stay here. But what is apparent is that is not driving demand for Airbnb in Forest Park. What seems to be driving demand for Airbnb in Forest Park is to have a house to have a party in.
All right.
So, and to sort of offload that, and really, quite frankly, what the renter is doing there is they're offloading their problems onto other neighbors that they will not have once they leave. Otherwise, they do it at their own house, but they don't want to disturb or upset those neighbors.
Mhm.
At least that's my take on it. So to have
So
a
you say,
program of the
can I
size,
clarify just very quickly? You're saying that the ones that they were not their own personal homes, they were like vacant homes that they were renting out as a party place? Okay,
well, it wasn't explicitly as a part. In fact, it said no.
well, yeah, but it was a vacant place that
That's
people came to. Okay,
And so what Cincinnati has is a system that it's actually fairly easy to navigate, but it's got a lot of moving parts to it. In order to support this infrastructure of Airbnb that's already present in the city. We don't have a similar infrastructure out here, either in the inspection area or in the number of homes. And so it just didn't seem to be readily transferable from what City of Cincinnati has to what we might have. But it was discussed with the council at our work session, and brought up, should we have a license system? And at this point, I mean, it's certainly subject to change, but at this point, I'm not recommending that we do.
Yeah, we're not recommending that. Mainly because of the negative effects that it has on the existing community. We think it's already, quite frankly, in R1 districts already prohibited. You can't run a business there. So, but it tends to raise the rents in terms of if people buy a house specifically to run an Airbnb, not to live in it, which seems to be what's going on here. You're taking a house off the market that would normally be um, a single family home that someone would buy and live in because we're a bedroom community. Most of the homes here are single family homes. They're built specifically for that purpose, and they're arranged in that purpose in the neighborhoods. So Airbnb tends to take those houses off the market. They also tend to raise rents in the area because, quite frankly, you can make more money renting your house Airbnb than you can leasing it to somebody for a year, or 2 or 3 or 4, and it tends to do that. And there's a lot of statistics that go along that way. And finally, this is not a revenue issue for us in terms of taxing it or raising revenue or doing anything. It really is a quality of life issue. We're looking to maintain our neighborhoods, turn them into and keep them owner-occupied homes or long-term rentals who put down roots in the community, roots in the school system, and who are good neighbors. And we have so few of them right now that we're able to find. In fact, we've only found literally 3. The negative impacts far outweigh the positive impacts and the disruption on existing folks. So now's the time to do it if we're going to do it. And again, if you want to do it, or someone else wants to do it, they have the ability to petition city council for a change going forward.
then I, before saying much more, but how easy would that be to do? I mean, if I are any of you or all of you familiar with what's happening up in Hamilton with the Spooky Nook that's coming in 2021? Have you heard of anything of that or aware of it? It's a sports complex. It's a guy out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Wendell's shaking his head. It's coming to Hamilton. They've broke ground. They're doing a lot of things. It's supposed to open in 2021, and it is a time and a place and a difference in our world of people will be looking for places to stay. And the big thing about Spooky Nook is it's really a major place for youth type sports activity. They have inside baseball, and I don't know, Wendell, you're shaking your head. I can't go on about Spooky Nook, but it is a place that we know it's going to bring from across the country. It's going to bring a lot of people into the area, and again, just short-term rental seems to be an interesting way for many people to say, I could supplement my already very difficult budget with something. Is there any way of even just saying that it has to be owner occupied as in, even if it's a long-term rental, that the person has to be there or has to know who's coming. Airbnb apparently does a pretty good job of screening people. You're laughing. Were these Airbnb people? He's not.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay. Wendell or Kim, I guess.
Okay, anyone else have anything to say? I see Mr. Burns is raising his hand, and we have another fellow, Mr. Wolf. You can be after Mr. Burns.
Yeah, I I understand the nature of what we're saying here related to especially the opportunity in Hamilton. Part of what I do, I will be in and out of that location because I'm a tennis official for the USTA. And as a result, there are tons of tournaments that will be coming in and out of that venue. Also, I've worked in the city of Hamilton in my profession, and one thing that is we miss, and one thing I see often in this situation, because Riverside Tennis Club is one of those clubs that is existing today that gets tournaments, and there are also softball tournaments. And many of those individuals who come to those types of events, one, they don't want to commute too far. Hamilton doesn't offer that opportunity, but what typically happens is they stop at about Old Mac, at the hotel right across the street or nearby the restaurant right across from the mall, and they end up getting lost getting there just from that short distance. You're talking about 12 miles, not even 12 miles. You're talking about 7 miles just to get to the location that's currently hosting. This location that we're debating here is probably about a mile north of that in the old manufacturing district. While I'm not opposed to the conversation, I just want to lay in the practicalities of the type of visitation that would occur, because these are more of a sportscation type of experience. These individuals, they come in, they come out, they're very orderly, they do what they need to do because their children or themselves are very highly disciplined. Those aren't the people we're dealing with. The situation that we've had and the situation that it will typically occur has been somewhat of an impediment to the neighborhoods that have been impacted. I can speak from my own experience in my neighborhood that half of the residents in this 40 home cluster just in my section are on high alert every time there's a car that doesn't have an Ohio license plate, and even to the extent it doesn't have a Hamilton County sticker, because of the experiences that we've had. Are we trying to inhibit people from making a living in this situation? No. Are we trying to make sure that our homes as a resident in these communities where they occur are fairly treated? Yes. In the way that these situations are occurring today, there are no protections for the neighbor. So an R1 district in an R1 home that is existing today, regardless of where it is, there are protections for both the resident who lives in that home as well as his or her neighbor. Because much like the masks that we're wearing today, we're not wearing them for ourselves, we're wearing them for our neighbor. So R1 is the same. If you follow the rules for R1, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also protecting your neighbor and respecting the sanctity in which they purchased their home so that they can practice their livelihood and their particular life. Does that mean that they couldn't do what they could do today with regard to a daycare? They can do a daycare. There's exceptions for daycare. Can they potentially have a Airbnb? Sure, as long as they go through special exception. That process is not that hard. You just have to be aware of the rules that exist today in every municipality. Every municipality has the option for special exception. Forest Park is trying to basically say, guys, We want to know, however, we don't want to be overly governing this process. We don't want to be in a situation whereby we're taxing someone for something that they may not need, or they are being overly officious about a process. What this is doing is giving you a fine line whereby if you choose to go through the special exception, your particular neighbors are aware of it because that's the process and they can speak to it, right? And you have the ability as a business owner to speak to your specific need, and so that everybody's fair. In the current situation, there is no opportunity to do that. And as a result, the neighborhood has been grossly impacted or negatively impacted. There are members of council who live in this community that are in other sections, and they were impacted as well. So I understand the desire, but I think this is a good middle ground for Forest Park.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. I guess what I would ask then, in addition to that, because you have mentioned, let's say that I want to do this, that I could come to Forest Park Council and ask for an exception. Has there already been in place things that you would have within that exception, or is that something that's still in that planning stage that needs to be regulated? I guess regulated is the word I want to use.
No, go ahead, Chris.
Answer that. Special exception is the hearing process in which there are 6 standards that the Planning Commission looks at. And if they determine that the application has met those standards, they're essentially obligated to approve
Okay,
a special exception application. And those are in our zoning code, and I can put them up on the website. I was going to put them up on the screen, but I think it probably is getting a little too much into the weeds. But there is a process that's been established. It's a long established process.
okay. I did
Okay.
not know that. Okay.
Mr. Wolf, that you raised your hand earlier. Oh, we can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. Or Chip, if you could unmute him. Go ahead. Oop.
How about now?
Yes. Oops. Can't hear him now. Hold on, sir. You're unmuted, but maybe your microphone's not working.
How about now?
Is that him or is that you, Chip? Go ahead and speak.
That's him.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I just had a couple of thoughts to add to this conversation. The first thought is I'm always concerned when we go down the road of legislating things that impact entire community based on a small number of incidents that may or may not really even ultimately be largely impacted by the legislation that we're proposing. And the reason why I say that is because first of all, I live on Corona. I've lived here for 17 years, I think. So on my street, there are a number of houses where the owners of those homes have lived in them as long as I've lived in mine or longer. And they have house parties at their homes a number of times a year that block the entire street with cars. Some others that have parties that play loud music that everyone in the C section can hear. And those are people having parties in their own homes. So, you know, I become a little bit concerned that we wanted to legislate a restriction on people's ability to enjoy and use their properties as they best see fit based on something that is only indirectly related to the thing that we're trying to legislate. And I say indirectly because, I mean, if people are going to have house parties, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with renting, except that the person who's renting isn't the owner. But, you know, the guy next door could be the owner and have a party that's more disruptive to the neighborhood than the rented party. So that was my first thought. My second thought is, in my own life and in my own business that I work at, whenever things come down the road that we need to consider making changes, we try to come about it from the standpoint of making the least disruptive change possible. And so if what we're trying to do is minimize the risk of vacant properties being rented for house parties, should we not maybe consider wording this legislation in a way to prohibit that use instead of prohibiting all short-term rentals? The next thought, the third thought that I have is sort of a dual thing. You know, we have a lot of people who, especially here in Ohio, who we've got a word for them, snowbirds. A lot of people who live here in the summertime, they own their home and they have another home in a warmer climate that they live in the cooler months. And in decades past, they would have turned off the water and turned off the gas and the electric and locked up the doors and left that house vacant with no one to care for it. Now I think that doesn't happen as often. I think sometimes I have family members who do this, and they have to pay someone to maintain that property and check up on it during the winter when they're not there. But in 2020, in the gig economy, we're finding solutions for all kinds of efficiency problems by finding ways to share resources that we're not able to make full use of. And there's a ecological angle to this too. If you've got a home that's perfectly adequate to support a family and you're only at that home for 6 months of the year, it makes a whole lot more sense to let another family use that home for the other 6 months of the year. That's why we have bicycle sharing, we have car sharing, we have home sharing, and it's not just Airbnb. There are other services that have come about to allow all different sort of variations of home sharing, including home swaps. I just recently heard a radio reporting on the movement of home swaps, where a family from Sweden that wants to come for 3 weeks to Oregon, and a family from Oregon that wants to go to Sweden for 3 weeks, and that's becoming a really big thing. They just swap lives. They pick up each other's car keys at the airport and house keys, and they're able to share their homes and make good ecological and efficient use of that resources there. And so I just would encourage us, as we're thinking about this, to consider all of those things and try to craft regulations or legislation, zoning regulations, in a way to be the minimal invasiveness possible, to eliminate or minimize the risk of the exact problem we're trying to solve, without clobbering all of those other really good uses, including those that Karen brought up. You know, that it sounds to me like you have in Karen a person that's probably pretty common in Forest Park. She finds herself in a house with lots of rooms, and if somebody needs a place to stay for the weekend because they're coming to visit family or something like that, then that's a good use of that resource that is her home. And in that case, it's not likely that there's going to be an out of control party at her home because she lives in it. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would point out again that this is limiting short-term rentals less than a month. So if there was that 6-month or that 4-month renter, that this would not preclude that. And right now, the view that we're looking at, again, this is the discussion point, is that these types of rentals are in fact businesses operating in a residential neighborhood. And that those types of regulations are already in place that keep that from happening. So that which is part of the issue. So it's just really just a clarification and to be specific, in that you can't do this and you can't rent these types of things. So anybody else in favor or against that has any other comments for this evening? Again, this is the public hearing for discussion. There'll be a council meeting in the future that will have, that this will be obviously discussed again when the ordinance comes up for consideration. There are council members and the mayor who are here observing. They'll have an opportunity to bring back some of this discussion. We'll bring it back to the work session for all of city council. And obviously it is available for review. It's recorded. So it'll be available if any city council. Everybody's comments here will be taken into account, and there are absolutely warranted. It was a very, very good, thoughtful, high-level discussion, I believe. So I want to thank everyone for their comments. Is there anyone else who has anything in favor of the ordinance or against the ordinance? Oh, Mrs. Wessel.
I have a question. And maybe this is just being really, I don't even know what word to put with it, cynical. If you're saying that the next time this comes up is when it's going to be in front of the council for voting, even all of our comments and everything that are here tonight, how do I, because obviously, it's not getting very far out into the public, or public hasn't paid attention that they're not here. How can, and this is actually just as a resident, how can I as a resident feel confident that comments that David or I have made that make pretty good sense could actually have an impact on changing this ordinance as presented? Or does the council on that particular night have to make that change on that particular night? Because it's
Go ahead.
typically too, these things are already decided by everybody before they get to the council meeting, whether they're going to go yes or no.
Well, this has already been discussed at work session. This is at least the third or fourth time that this has been discussed at city council work sessions, and actually I believe at maybe even an actual city council meeting. But it will come up at a work session for further discussion. And that'll be advertised. It'll be publicized. It'll be on we put it out into the FP News the same way we would have done this one. We put it out as best we can. It's publicized at various locations throughout the city. It's posted, but it's also, we have the FP News and we have a email blast that goes out, and we can make sure that you or any of your neighbors or anybody else that wants to sign up for it, that we send those out to everyone to let them know. But the next step would be a work session of council to discuss it. Once it goes to the work session, then it would be brought up at a council meeting, and it would have 2 readings there. So there's probably at least two more meetings, potentially 3. They could pass it at the next meeting, after the work session. But this is something that we've been working on, I think, since around Christmas, if not before.
Can I put in my hat to be helpful within that work session? Or is that
You-
only for council
you-
members?
No, it is, public's invited to attend. And.
Does
and you'll
anybody
be-
know that date right now? Because I'll put it on my calendar, because I don't see the notices. I really don't spend much time on the news era of the world for reasons unknown.
I'm not sure what the date would be, but I believe it is the first Monday in June. Mayor? I see the mayor looking it up. We can't hear him. Can unmute the mayor, please? Hang on. Okay.
Normal.
Okay, we hear you now, Chuck. We didn't hear what you said before.
Generally speaking, our council meetings are first and third Mondays, and the work sessions are second and fourth Mondays.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. So we've got one coming up then supposedly next Monday, but that's Memorial Day. Will there be a change?
No, there's not.
There will be no meeting this coming Monday on the
Okay.
25th.
So this will be at a work session the second Monday in
June.
June. Okay. Anybody, last time, anybody speak in favor? Anybody speak against? Seeing none, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for attending.